As a huge fan of Gal Guardian's Demon Purge, I was overjoyed to hear the announcement of a sequel to one of my favorite games of 2023. Gal Guardian Servants of the Dark has arrived, and impressively, just 2 years after the original's release. But does this follow-up recapture the same humor, addictive gameplay, and engaging co-op experience that made the original so memorable, or have these gals been influenced by a demon to star in a bad game? Let's find out in our full review. And real quick, don't let the echo chamber whisper sweet nothings into your ears. Keep independent content alive by heading over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames to gain Discord access to the greatest indie gaming community. Enjoy early ad-free shows, a new podcast 3 days early, shoutouts at the end of every video we produce, and so much more. Your new indie gaming community is waiting for you. The original Gal Guardians introduced us to Shinobu and Maya, two schoolgirls thrown into a chaotic adventure as their school transformed into a demonic castle. At its core, it was a classic 2D action platformer reminiscent of the legendary Castlevania games. The dark setting and eerie world were masterfully paired with sharp, hilarious writing, a lovable cast, and loads of laugh-out-loud moments. And the gameplay? Surprisingly pretty good. The standout feature was the unique swapping mechanic that let you seamlessly switch between the two girls, each with their own distinct abilities. Or you could team up with a friend for some co-op fun. I loved the game so much that it earned my elusive golden genie lamp of approval. And for what it's worth, the vast majority of players seem to enjoy the game as well. It still holds a very positive review score on Steam to this day. That said, one common critique among gamers was that it felt a bit too hand-holdy. Some wished it would open up more and lean into being a full-fledged Metroidvania. Personally, I didn't have that issue. Honestly, I love that it wasn't a traditional Metroidvania. There are already plenty of those out there. But it seems that Inti Creates took that feedback to heart, as Gal Guardian's Servants of the Dark fully embraces the Metroidvania formula. Unfortunately, it ends up being a pretty average take on the genre. This time around, we're introduced to two new protagonists, Kirika and Masha. Sporting undeniably adorable maid outfits, the duo embarks on a quest to restore the Demon Lord Maxim to his former glory, after he's taken quite a beating in battle and now needs you to gather his scattered bones. While the game does make an effort to recapture the humor and charm of the original, it never quite reaches the same heights. Sure, there are moments that are still amusing, but the new lead characters just don't pack the same punch as Shinobu and Maya did. The writing feels like it's lost a bit of its edge, and while other characters make appearances, the overall tone of the game lacks the risque laugh-out-loud spark that made its predecessor so entertaining. This isn't to say the writing here is outright terrible, it just had an incredibly tough act to follow, and yes, I know that's a weird statement considering this is a spin-off of freaking Galgun of all things, but what can I say, Demon Purge was the shit. Story isn't the only area where this sequel stumbles. By committing fully to the Metroidvania genre, Servants of the Dark starts to show some cracks in its armor. That's not to say it's all bad. Credit where it's due, the game nails the fundamentals. Masha takes on the role of the whip user this time, excelling in close quarters combat. Her whip deals serious damage, she's fairly nimble at dodging attacks, and she can even use seeds from Demon Realm plants for an additional attack. And then there's Kirika, the gunner, armed with a machine gun and a secondary shotgun. She's built for long-range combat, but you'll have to reload her weapons periodically. Personally, I found myself sticking to Masha most of the time. She felt far more versatile and practical, except during some boss fights where keeping your distance is the smarter play. The girls also come equipped with a variety of optional secondary weapons. You can arm them with swords, bombs, and honestly, an overwhelming number of items. So many that you're left not knowing what to do with half of them. I appreciate that the developers tried to add some depth to the combat, but when your basic attacks are more than enough to get the job done, it often feels like there's little point in experimenting with all the extra weapons and skills. In single-player mode, you can freely swap between the two characters at any time. In local 2-player co-op, you'll each control one of the characters, but you can also switch who controls whom throughout the gameplay. The 2-player mode works reasonably well here, though, as is becoming a bit of a theme throughout this review, it doesn't quite hit the same mark as it did in Demon Purge. That said, I still appreciate having the option for co-op, and the game does a solid job of preventing things from getting overly chaotic, like taking unnecessary damage and so on. About as well as you could hope for within the constraints of a Metroidvania format anyways. One fun touch is the ability to jump on the other character's head in this mode, which I suspect might lead some players to discover clever ways to break the game and access areas areas they're not technically supposed to reach yet. The main goal of the game is what you'd expect from most Metroidvania games: roam across a sprawling map, reach your next destination, face off against bosses, uncover treasures and secrets, learn new abilities to see even more of the map. You know, the usual. The map design is pretty mediocre and often left me wandering aimlessly, which is admittedly one of my smaller pet peeves with this genre, so your frustrations with that particular aspect may vary, but it seemed aggressively bad in this game. The enemies are dull and uninspired, and most of the time, they're not even worth the effort to fight. While the platforming is solid and unlocking new abilities like double jump and air dash is fun, there's just nothing here that hasn't been done before and been done a lot better. Take this year's phenomenal Ender Magnolia, for example. Not to play favorites, but the game excels in pretty much everything. Art, map design, music, controls, story, lore, you name it. Compared to some of the standout Metroidvania titles, this experience just feels flat. Even the fast travel system feels poorly implemented and makes getting around a real chore. If you were hoping for a challenge, you'll also be disappointed, well, depending. The default settings don't offer much of a challenge at all, so if you're looking for a real test of your skills, you'll probably want to bump things up to the highest level. There are 3 difficulty options after all. I was honestly surprised though by how easily enemies and bosses went down on default settings, though I'll admit some of the boss battles were pretty clever and definitely among the game's standout moments. They just weren't all that much of a challenge most of the time. Negatives aside though, one area where Servants of the Dark does shine a bit is in its castle, which serves as a hub of sorts. The spirits you collect throughout your journey can be used to revive fallen warriors, who then take up roles in your castle. You might end up with a castle chef, a blacksmith, or even gain the ability to adjust the difficulty at any time. I really enjoyed this feature and had fun watching my castle grow. Leveling up also happens here by collecting Maxim's bones. Grab enough, and you'll gain new abilities and grow stronger. The downside to that is that outside of currency to spend, which you usually have plenty of, it makes killing enemies often feel like time wasted. Yes, these enemies do sometimes drop the bones that you need, however, most of the time I simply found them in treasure chests or by other means. Same can be said for some of the shopkeepers that you stumble across. They have a few handy items here or there, but a lot of crap that I just found elsewhere and didn't need to buy at all. Visually, I was surprised to find that Servants of the Dark doesn't look quite as sharp as Demon Purge. It caught me off guard. I even went back to double check the original. While the art style feels somewhat similar to the dark and gritty original, something about this new release just feels off to me. Maybe it's the fact that the game expands so far beyond the confines of a dark castle. Bland environments, lifeless caves, deserts, and forests, with some sprites even being directly recycled from the first game. Don't get me wrong, I love pixel art, I'm fine with them using it again in spots here, and there are still some cool designs, including some lovely cutscenes and character portrait art, but visually the world just didn't pull me in the way I was hoping it would. On top of that, the sound mix feels really off. The music sits too far back in the mix, I couldn't find an option to adjust things, and this just causes the girls' yelps to take center stage. A bit grating without a better balance. The tracks I could hear were solid, but there just weren't as many as I'd hoped. The same compositions repeated often, and they felt a bit on the generic side. The game does feature some voice acting, which is a nice touch, but overall, I found myself pretty disappointed with both the visuals and the audio of this game. So I have to admit, Gal Guardian's Servants of the Dark turned out to be a disappointment overall for me. While it certainly feels like a bigger game in terms of exploration, as we all know, bigger doesn't always mean better. By fully committing to the Metroidvania genre, Servants of the Dark ends up blending into a sea of exceptional releases within this category, and not in a good way. It simply doesn't stand out. The game lacks the focus, charm, heart, and playability that made its predecessor shine, ultimately making it one of the more significant letdowns of the year so far. To be clear, it's not inherently a bad game per se, it's just frustratingly forgettable, and honestly, that's a sentiment I never thought I'd find myself expressing. Here at I Dream of Indie Games, we believe that games are so much more than a number. That's why we have our 3 Genie Lamp tier system. A bronze lamp represents a good game with quite a few issues, a silver lamp is for a great game with just a few small issues, and the elusive golden Genie Lamp of approval is for those essential indie game releases that belong in your collection. We also have the rusty lantern for mediocre titles that have just a faint glimmer of hope, and the dreaded Indie Krampus for the ones you should avoid. And when it comes to Gal Guardians, Servants of the Dark, I actually have to go with the rusty lantern on this one. It's just really a mediocre Metroidvania experience. For far too long, you, the gamer, have been denied honest gaming coverage. Indie developers and publishers have lost their voice, but no longer. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and head over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames to join this epic campaign for indie visibility. The echo chamber trembles as our message grows louder. Voice to the voiceless!